Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on election night here in Oregon. Voters only have about 30 minutes left to drop off ballots, a little less than that, about 23 minutes. And new this year, ballots can be mailed and postmarked by 8 o'clock on Election Day. The second we start getting results, we will bring them to you.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting and busy evening. KGW has teams this evening spread across the metro area covering all the big races. We've also got experts here with us, so let us introduce them now. KGW political analyst Len Bergstein is back with us this year. We're also joined tonight by Rebecca Tweed, a political consultant who supports Republican candidates.
And Jesse Beeson is here. He runs a foundation that supports and promotes good health in Oregon and Southwest Washington. And he's on the board of Color PAC, which supports progressive BIPOC candidates. Before we get to our esteemed panelists, let's highlight some of the big races we'll be focusing on tonight.
And let us start with nothing else than the race for governor. On the Democratic side, former House Speaker Tina Kotek is up against State Treasurer Tobias Reed. It is such a crowded field. On the other side, the GOP side, we can't actually fit all of the names on a single graphic here. Len's laughing already. We are just getting started, though. These are some of the top candidates. They include former House Minority Leader Christine Drazen, former chair of the Oregon GOP Bob Tiernan, Salem oncologist Dr. Bud Pierce, who lost to Kate Brown in the general election in 2016, if you remember that, and conservative writer Bridget Barton. Now, come November, the two winners on each side, Democrat and Republican, are going to face Betsy Johnson. She is the former state senator who is running for governor as an unaffiliated candidate.
There are also two key races for Portland City Council. Joanne Hardesty has a big challenge to retain her seat. Vadim Mazursky and Renee Gonzalez are the two candidates who could knock her out of the race. Remember, if no one reaches 50%, there will be a runoff between the top two in November. So Hardesty's hoping to at least be in that top two. And Dan Ryan is also up for re-election. His toughest challenger is AJ McCreary, who is the co-founder of a nonprofit called Equitable Giving Circle.
All right, let us talk about big money, which has flooded into Oregon's brand new congressional district, the sixth, by some accounts, the third most expensive Democratic primary in the entire country. Carrick Flynn on the left there, he's a newcomer to politics. He is backed by a cryptocurrency billionaire. We're going to be talking about this a lot tonight. His opponent to watch, Andrea Salinas. She's a former state lawmaker and a lobbyist.
Redistricting has made a big change to the 5th congressional district. It now includes voters in Central Oregon instead of voters on the coast. Incumbent Democrat Kurt Schrader is trying to hang on to the seat. He is facing a tough challenge from Jamie McLeod Skinner. And on the Republican side, it's likely a race between former Happy Valley Mayor Lori Chavez Dreamer and Jimmy Crumpacker.
Okay, and there are many, many more races we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to have results scrolling right here across the bottom of your screen. You can also watch and read the results in real time on KGW.com and the KGW mobile app. A lot going on.
So it's time to welcome our panelists once again, Len Bergstein, Rebecca Tweed, and Jesse Beeson. Thank you all for being here. We're so appreciative to have you here. Let's kick it off by finding out what you're going to be paying special attention to tonight and what you feel are the overarching themes of the evening. And we'll begin with our KGW political analyst, Len Bergstein.
Thanks, Laural. It's good to be here with all of you. And what we've got is obviously a special election in the sense that the big stakes, all the races we talked about, the congressional races and what have you. And then we've got this voter sentiment, which we really will be talking about a lot, I think. We started off the election thinking that voters were angry, really ticked off at their own circumstances, and were tired of politics as usual. So we thought this would be an anti-incumbent election. What we'll do tonight is watch as those returns come in and see how that plays out with different people.
And I just want to pick up on this idea, Len, and bring it over to you, Rebecca, of voters thinking Oregon essentially is on the wrong track. We've seen this in polls, we've seen it in conversations on the street, with interviews, with stories. And a few months ago, I think back in February, I asked you, what's going well in Oregon right now? And you kind of laughed in my face at the moment. So the question for
Still
you
laughing.
Still laughing. Is that going to translate, do you think, at the ballot box? Do you think that sentiment, that anger that we're talking about, anti-incumbency, anti-establishment, is that going to translate tonight?
I think it's translating in how voters are talking about the election, but we have to face it. Voters are creatures of habit, like we all are. And I think the anti-establishment movement or sentiment is what's created a ballot that's bigger than we've ever had in Oregon. But at the end of the day, voters want to vote in something that's comfortable, something that they know, even if they don't like it. And that's why Oregon has one of the highest incumbency retention rates in the country, 96.3%. We re-elect incumbents. And so I think we'll see a little bit of it in some of the seats, but I think what's expected is probably what's going to be the turnout.
All right, so I'm hearing no surprises yet.
Not yet. I'm not predicting any right now.
Right.
Well, Jesse, what themes are you watching?
Well, I've been paying attention to the district attorney's races, both I think in Washington County and Marion County, mainly just because of the tone. In some ways, it feels like they're running against Portland for at least on the incumbent side. And I'm also intrigued, as you mentioned, I'm on the board of Color Pack, and we are seeing over 37 women and men of color running across the state. So in some of these down ticket races that aren't getting a lot of media attention, we have the chance to really make more reflective elected offices across the state.
What are some of the races maybe that aren't getting as much attention that you're talking about?
I think Clackamas County Commission, I think Libra Ford is mounting a very aggressive campaign against an incumbent. It's certainly a race that I'm interested in, and actually even a small race, the Oregon Court of Appeals, to keep Judge Ortega on the seat, who's attracted a pretty, I think radical is a fair way to say it, challenger, and not a lot of people are going to vote in that race, but I think it's an important one.
And Len, I want to jump in here and bring it back to you on the other side here. We talk about all the Republican candidates in this very crowded field, and Christine Drazen and Bob Tiernan, according to some of the polls, coming close to the top, at least in these polls we've seen. I don't know how much we can take the polls, maybe with a grain of salt, but is there room for Republicans in Oregon this election? And maybe I'm jumping ahead to the general, but when you think about how Oregon has not elected a Republican governor since 1982, what is the feeling now on sort of with that underlying wrong track anti-incumbent context here?
Well, luckily Rebecca's got to worry about that more than I do. I wouldn't love to take the Republican candidate into a general election, figuring that we're going to get someone in the 20 to 25% out of this field we've talked about. The challenge for the Republicans right away is going to be to consolidate their vote and then go after the vote that's out there between, as we said earlier, the Democratic candidate and then Betsy Johnson. So it's going to be a very interesting and very expensive race. Republicans will have a big challenge coming out of, I think, this primary to try and consolidate and then go forward.
Well, talking about the Republicans, Rebecca, and some of the other races, I mean, we've seen contentious races and a lot of money spent in the 5th and 6th districts, most of the focus on the Democrats. How is that impacting the Republican primary and then going towards the general election?
Yeah, it's been really exciting, actually, to watch how Republicans have stood up and run in those campaigns very aggressively. Lori Chavez-DeRemer has been everywhere. She's been running a very long time, and then all of a sudden has some incumbents that have made it challenging. Congressional District 5 is very difficult. It's, as you mentioned in the beginning, the redistricting really changed the dynamics of who those voters are. Republican has a tough time in that spot, but I think they have to run in the more moderate tone that they've been taking, and I think that's why Lori Chavez-DeRemer will probably come out of this tonight and be the most moderate that can take on who I think will win the Democratic
You think she's going to beat Crumpacker?
I do.
Yeah, I think it'll be the Democratic one first.
I think Congressman Schrader will hold that seat.
I think he will.
Yeah, I think I was worried for a little bit that he might not. But
and why did that worry you?
Well, worried in that I'm watching it and thinking that Jamie McLeod Skinner, who's now running again, a number of times, might be able to give him a challenge. He doesn't have a lot of friends on the Democrat side, doesn't have a lot of friends on the Republican side, but because of redistricting has the benefit of almost running in an open seat, right? There's a lot of voters who've never voted for him before. So I think that'll be a really interesting.
But would Jamie McLeod Skinner be an easier candidate to run against as a Republican, being that she's to the left of Schrader?
She would be, yeah. I mean, if we're looking at what we want the general election outcome to be, Congressman Schrader will be a little bit tougher because he is that incumbent again. But incumbent is, a double-edged sword because you also have a record. You have things that you've done or money you've raised, ways that a Republican can go after an opponent in a seat where essentially, 30% of those voters have never voted for him before.
And we should point out, though, that we've learned tonight that Congressman Schrader is actually in Washington or in the Washington, D.C. area, not here in Oregon tonight, for what it's worth. And you make this point about, President Biden endorsing Schrader. And in a sense, some analysts have said that may be because they think he's best positioned to win against a Republican in the general, right?
Absolutely. That would be the strategic move to make.
But the flip side of that, obviously, is that people are watching to see whether or not Biden's endorsement means something, much in the way that people around the country are looking at what Trump's endorsements mean in various races that, are happening almost simultaneously with our state. So Biden's got a lot at stake here in that 5th congressional district as well.
And I think so do progressive Oregonians who lined up almost lockstep behind Jamie McLeod Skinner. She got almost all of the labor union endorsements. Yeah. She got the Working Families Party at the national level.
And all the political leaders in all the counties in the district came out and endorsed her.
Yeah, and so you have this, again, where the House steps in, the House committee steps in and wants to make a decision on behalf of the local Democrats, and local Democrats don't like that. We'll see if that means that Schrader makes it. But folks that I talk to in that district are upset, not just at Kurt, but at how the election has played out.
Unprecedented in some ways. I'm just going to jump in here, actually, because we want to talk about something else, another issue that may come up tonight. We talk about it only being 7:47 and the timing here of when we're going to get results. And you and I have been talking about this a lot. Clackamas County, 2/3 of their ballots, give or take, have a problem with the barcode where it's blurry, which means they're actually going to have to count these by hand, 2 people, different parties transferring them. So I want to go out there, I think, to Oregon City and check in with Catherine Cook at Clackamas County Elections Headquarters. Catherine, fill us in on this.
Oh, that's right, David, you nailed it. About 2/3 of the ballots are having issues. The ink and the barcodes are to blame, but there is a fix. If you look here at this long line of last-minute voters, most of folks here know about the problem and they are also aware of the fix, but there are definitely some mixed feelings on the issue. Here's a closer look at the ballots. The ink on the faulty barcodes was either printed too lightly or it came out blurry. Ballots that are rejected because of that get handwritten duplicate ballots. Bipartisan teams, that's important, are taking care of that process, but it is definitely going to take time. As of yesterday, Clackamas County had about 65,000 ballots returned for about 21%, but already today they've had about 16,000 more to add to that. Clark County Clerk Sherry Hall is asking voters for patience and trust as they get through them all.
Our top priority is to get this election done very accurately and on time. And accuracy is way more important than speed. The results will be posted tonight at 8 o'clock for the first time, and it is definitely going to be less ballots than usual on our first results for election night.
Back live here in Oregon City. Earlier today, Secretary of State Shemia Fagan dropped by, and after touring the setup here and seeing how Clackamas County is handling the situation, she issued a statement and said that she is confident that they will report accurate results.
And I know, Catherine, we're kind of on the fly here, so I'm going to throw this back at you, though. Any sense of how long it's going to take to count all of those votes? Are we talking a day, 2 days? I mean, maybe they want to set expectations low here, but what are you hearing?
The latter, David. Definitely not giving away any time frames here, and for good reason. They don't know what to expect. This is obviously very out of the ordinary with the ballots, but then add on top of that the postmarked by 8 o'clock return change that Oregon voters get to take advantage of if that's how they wanted to vote this year. So there are a couple of layers of changes that are going to impact exactly when all of the ballots come in, but they're saying at least by mid-June at the latest, but it could be much less than that. That's their drop dead time, but we could see results in a few days, but I can tell you that setting the bar way low. I can tell you that tonight, after they count the signatures, they're going to process the signatures, and then they're going to reconfigure how they're going to be opening the ballots and doing the duplicate ballots if needed over the next several days. They're talking about having two shifts of 5 hours each, Monday through Friday, for volunteers who are going to take up that task. But again, they're not giving any specific times on when they will have all of the results.
All right,
Sooner than
Catherine
later,
Cook
they
there
hope.
in Oregon City. You know, I think the bottom line there, you did answer it. It is not going to happen quickly. And the interesting thing here, guys, is the 5th district, which we've been talking about, McLeod, Skinner, and Schrader, a big chunk of that in Clackamas County, right?
County. And then, so keep that in mind as we bring you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Catherine. Keep that in mind as we bring you results that, especially in close races, Clackamas County is 10% of the electorate in Oregon. 11% of Republican voters are in Clackamas County. So, Rebecca, that could really affect the Republican primary, right, with Christine Drazen, who's from Clackamas County.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very important piece of the electorate that is kind of in this wavy space. And I also think, you know, there's a large portion of Clackamas County that's rural, and, you know, we anticipate that more rural voters are taking advantage of the postmark by 8 p.m. because ballot, you know, drop sites are 20, 30 miles away in some places. So I think these compounded issues are really going to make it interesting as we watch the returns come in. For every seat, as Jesse mentioned, some of those down ballot races for commission are some of the most intense that we've had, you know, this cycle. And so it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
This topic is real catnip for in terms of political insiders. It'll be the thing that the national folks look at, and they will talk about, or regardless of who is our gubernatorial candidates, and unless there's an upset in one of these races or whatever, this is the thing, unfortunately, we're going to be hearing about from the national folks talking about it.
And frankly, you're going to hear a lot of it from Republicans, right? We still, you know, have a party that still has challenges on whether President Biden is the president, that wants to, you know, challenge the election integrity. And I'll tell you, I run a statewide recount that came out by 835 votes, went to all of these places and watched them do the recount. It is specific as you can possibly get. They do a fantastic job of these elections offices. So I trust that the process will come out the way that we want it to, and that it will be accurate. It's just kind of how do we do it, right? And it may change the way that we approach elections going forward. There may have to be statutes that come forward on how we handle these issues, some new things that come from the Secretary of State's office, but overall, I think we're going to have a couple races we just don't know.
While we're on the topic here of national headlines here, and it's 7:53, so the next results, we hope in about 10 minutes, the first results, I should say. Let's talk about the other congressional district, the new seat. Laural and I talking about this one at length, the 6th, which I think encompasses parts of Yamhill, a corner of Clackamas, Salem, Marion County, and down, but especially on the Democrat side, because let's start there. The amount of money pouring into this race. You have Carrick Flynn. He's relatively unknown.
And a lot of voters saying, who is Carrick Flynn? They only know him because they've seen his ads, you know, wall to wall.
And I think that's what the mayor of Salem actually said, this Chuck Bennett. Who is this guy? And I still don't know. So you've got him. You've got Andrea Salinas, who's relatively well known, right, as a lawmaker and lobbyist here in the state. So, Len, let me start with you here. What do you make of the influx of the Bitcoin billionaires' money through the PAC? And we're talking 10 to 15 million by all accounts for just this one guy. Is this sort of a game changer for Oregon politics? What are you thinking?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, it's brought very much front and center the whole notion about whether money can actually win a seat like this. $12 million, $930,000 in the last week or so to go after Andrea Salinas and negative ads. So you really have an injection of something that Oregonians are not sure they want in their politics. So you've got an unknown. You've got a couple of other candidates there that have been self-financed with their own money through Bitcoins, West and Reynolds.
Right.
So you've got that. And then you've got Andrea Salinas's committee be supported by Bold PAC again. So you've got the with about $1 million. So you've got a lot of money. You've got political action committees. The more that we see the campaigns taken away from the candidates themselves and put in the hands of these third parties and well-financed, then there's reason for Oregonians to be concerned. So the race, though, is very, very big. And I think, you know, it'll be one of the ones we watch all the time, because if let's say Andrea Salinas can win that race, it'll send a very strong message about the way Oregonians can sort through this stuff, not be overly swayed by money we see in races all around the other country. But this is big money.
The polls have shown them neck and neck.
Neck and neck.
Carrick Flynn and Andrea Salinas, and that's why we're seeing the negative ads coming from that PAC, Protect Our Future, which is backed by the cryptocurrency billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried.
Who's in a bunch of other races also around the country. He's in Georgia, and he's a couple of other races in Kentucky and some other places. So he's put a big chunk of money down talked to and this was Jesse's
But
point
no one
earlier.
knowns, I think, or no first timers. I think Carrick Flynn's the only one who's a first timer.
I think you're right about that, and he's got a relationship with the guy's brother or something like that. The way these stories are, but it really goes to a point that Jesse was making earlier about who's in these races and what they're influencing and whatever. So it's a big deal. It's worth every voter watching, both as to the results, because there are some lessons we've got to learn about this, regardless of who actually wins the race.
I know Selena's saying that her theme has been Oregonians can't be bought.
Right.
Sort of the backlash of all the money being spent.
And I mean, to your point, I just want to bring Jesse into this conversation because Cody Reynolds, who's one of the other candidates here, told NPR, quote, "If Carrick Flynn wins this race, democracy is dead." Jesse, what do you think?
Well, I think any candidate running is prone to hyperbole, so I think it's fair to say that might be a little bit there. I do think that Oregonians have said time and again they don't like big money in politics. It was just on the ballot 2 years ago and resoundingly said, no, we want
campaign finance reform.
Campaign finance reform. And the legislature can't agree on the rules. It may end up probably not on this November ballot, but we'll probably see a ballot measure pretty soon on campaign finance reform. That won't keep Bitcoin money out of federal races, unfortunately. And I think the question is, how will voters punish the Bitcoin candidates? And I think that remains to be seen. Andrea Salinas would have been the front runner in any traditional race, given her experience in that district. And so to see other candidates not get attention, Loretta Smith, Teresa Leon, because of the money flooding in, I think is a missed opportunity for Oregonians to see.
And they were all upset that the PAC that's backed by the Democrats also poured in $1 million in a primary, which is not traditional. And they were saying, the candidates you were talking about, including Loretta Smith and Leon, saying, that's not fair to all of us.
The anger at the DCCC from local Democratic Party folks and progressives in general is pretty deep. And that's frankly across the country, as I think more progressive folks are trying to uplift their candidates and seeing a traditional Democratic Party infrastructure from the national side come in and try to say, no, this is our decision to make here.
And how is all this impacting, Rebecca, the Republican side with Representative Ron Noble, the former McMinnville police chief? He's also, I think, going in his third term as a House member. How is all this money being spent and all the attention on the Democrats affecting the Republican primary?
Yeah, it actually is very helpful, I think, for the Republicans that are running, because the conversation has become about money in the Democrats and less about the issues that the Republicans are running on. So while you have, and it would be the same if it was the flip side, right? But the conversation has become less about what the candidates are running for, less about whether they're qualified, less about their principles and their leadership, and more about how their campaigns are run. So that attention allows the Republicans to distinguish themselves and really message what they want to message and talk to voters in that way. I do think that whichever Republican comes out of the primary needs to be very, very concerned about how much money will be spent against them, whether it's Carrick Flynn or Andrea Salinas that comes out on top. There's going to be national money that supports it. One of the problems with not liking campaigns that spend a lot of money is you have to have money to tell voters that campaign is spending a lot of money, right? The message doesn't get out unless you have those resources also. You have political folks talking about it. Do regular voters really respond to that message? Do they know it? That it's happening? That's one of the challenges.
Who's the stronger Republican in that race?
I think Ron Noble probably has the most name recognition and, has really represented a large part of that district. Andrea Salinas is well known, but the portion that knows her is a little bit smaller, a lot more voters, but geographically speaking. And so, you've got name recognition, but I think Ron Noble's run a better campaign. He's been out there talking to folks more. I get mail from him all the time. Text messages. I don't get that from the other candidates.
And I just want to mention here, we are 8 o'clock and 45 seconds. So polls in the state closed 45 seconds ago. So we'll be expecting those first results. We hope any moment now from the Secretary of State and from the counties. We're not going to do that for sure. We're definitely not going to do that. But there's so much to talk about tonight. I kind of want to move to this idea we were talking about earlier. a lot of people thinking Oregon on the wrong track, and we're wondering if that anger is going to show itself at the polls and on ballots. But also this idea that we're hearing from a lot of challengers in a lot of races, that at the state level, at the local level, that Oregon is, and we're hearing this, is really good on ideas, but not great on follow-up, not great on execution, not great on getting things done. That's definitely what we hear on the ground from our teams. But do you think that's going to play out again in this election?
Well, you've just synthesized, I think, the Democratic campaign for governor. That's really been the way that the two candidates have taken off. Tina Kotek has taken this question of what do voters want, and she said, I'm going to run as a traditional incumbent. I'm going to run on accomplishments. I'm going to say that things get done. Tobias Reed's response has been, yeah, how do you like what we've got so far? And he's trying to argue that his executive skills, the ones that you're talking about, actually making the programs work, is really the skill that voters want now. We will see over and over at the state and at the local level this challenge in terms of the way in which incumbents are punished for this feeling that the government's not working, or they're able to overcome that by saying, I got something done. And I know Jesse's got some strong thoughts about the city, but I think where the Hardesty race is a classic case of exactly the points that you're making.
But how do you sort of explain then on the Republican side here with Christine Drazen as one of the top candidates that she is in essence the Republican establishment in the state of Oregon?
Yeah, well, I think Christine Drazen represents a lot of the rural perspective, which rural Oregonians are angry right now, and because she served and because she fought, so to speak, against some of the policies and the principles that we've seen from the other side, she has a little bit more credibility, I think, going into the campaign to say, hey, I'm angry too. Here's what I tried to do. I need your help to get one level up to make sure it gets done, right? And she was a strong minority leader, all intents and purposes, with what she put forward, what she worked on to keep the base strong, but still do it in a credible way, which honestly can be very tough. I think rural Oregonians feel like they've been underrepresented. Logistically speaking, they have been. They've got, two senators that represent 60% of the state. So I think we have underrepresented communities that feel really angry, and they're coming out, but they're all voting for different people right now, or that's what they're telling us. So I guess we'll find out.
Well, let's take a look at these first numbers coming in. These are the numbers for governor on the Democratic side. Of course, these are early numbers, but just from these early numbers, Tina Kotek has a healthy lead over Tobias Reed. I don't know, any surprise there for you, Len?
Some early insiders were saying that she was up around 50% of her race. So again, she's run a traditional race. She's been able to talk about her accomplishments. She was able to kind of have a very credible statement about what Oregonians have gotten out of her progressive leadership. Tobias Reed had a more challenging attempt to kind of like be the outsider. I mean, here's somebody who's served in government, and he's saying, I'm really the outsider that you're looking for to solve these problems. Tougher argument to make. I think he made it really well as the campaign went on, but he had a lot to overcome, and some of these numbers are showing that.
And I think we may have some of our first numbers on the Republican side for the governor's race as well. Can we call those up if we do have them? There they are. Christine Drazen in the first spot. Again, this is just the first tranche of votes, keep in mind, but you can see there 23% of the votes counted so far. Bob Tiernan in second there, and then Stan Pulliam a distant third, Mayor of Sandy about 10%.
And that kind of bears out the polls we've been hearing about these two, Drazen and Tiernan, running neck and neck. And again, as we mentioned earlier about the Clackamas numbers, you've got to keep that in mind as you watch these numbers come in on the Republican side, that Drazen, and I guess Tiernan also from Clackamas County, right, in Lake Oswego. So these numbers really could be coming in for days still to determine which one, if they stay out and head, which one of these two ends up winning this election. I wanted to ask Jesse, because this is kind of an overarching theme that would fit into all of these races. But in 2020, we heard a lot about Black Lives Matter and racial justice, police reform, social justice. Those issues we haven't heard as much about. We've been hearing more about homelessness and crime. What has that done to the grassroots political activism, and how do you think those themes are going to reemerge?
I certainly hope. I hope they do. For the black folks that I talk to, it doesn't feel like we've made as much progress in 2 years as we should have. I think that there are many organizations on the ground working tirelessly to advance policies that make life better for black folks, and they care about homelessness and crime as much as anyone else. So I think that what we are seeing is that more and more organizations are engaging more and more people in a conversation about what's the source of the rise in crime? What is the source of homelessness? And how do we trace them back to decisions that we made 40 years ago? We, under Reagan and Democratic Congress, cut public housing and mental health, and we're seeing the results of that. It's just like any other piece of infrastructure. You stop paving a road, it looks fine for the first 10, 15 years, and then all of a sudden it's very clear it's broken. And that's what I think voters are very frustrated at, seeing the results of that. So I'm hopeful that we will get back to some of those big, larger issues in a broader context.
I'm going to jump in here, Jesse, because I understand we've got our first numbers as well from Portland City Council and those two positions.
Good, because we haven't really talked about this.
Yeah.
Okay, and the Oregonian, even with these early numbers, he has such a healthy lead. The Oregonian has called this for Dan Ryan with 58% right now to A.J. McCrary's 23%. She was running to the left of Dan Ryan. A lot of people saying that he had sort of turned his back on the progressive values that he ran on the last election.
And here's position 3. Well, look at this. Joanne Hardesty, 38% of the vote. Again, it's early. These are just the first ballots. Renee Gonzalez there at 25%, and Vadim Ozerski neck and neck with him. So for that second spot, potentially, again, if no candidate in this race gets 50% plus 1 vote, the top 2 will go to a runoff here. But this is interesting because, Len, you were sort of thinking that we could have seen Renee and Vadim both kind of near the top with Hardesty trailing. Again, it is early, but what do you kind of make of this right now at first glimpse?
Well, you have to put this in context. It would be surprising if she leads into the general election. I would be surprised if she doesn't get into the runoff. But let's say that these numbers are interesting to talk about. Remember, she started in January at 18%. There was 58% of generic votes against. They would vote for anybody but her.
And the same with Dan Ryan.
Exactly.
Only 10% were going to vote for him.
Exactly. So both of these incumbents started off, we thought they were going to pay an incredible penalty for being the incumbents. Dan lucked out, I think, in terms of his opponent, and his opponent wasn't able to mount a really successful campaign, and he wasn't ever tabbed as the incumbent. Joanne Hardesty is the face of incumbency in the city, and she's been very strong. The flip side of that is she has a strong base. She's got a record of accomplishments. This stuff about green energy, the stuff about street response. People, I think, her campaign found its voice and connected up with her vote. I don't think she'll lead into it'd be surprised to me if she leads into the general, but I would be surprised if she's not in the general.
We should just remind folks, too, that the top 2, they have to get 50% plus to avoid a runoff.
Right.
Looks like there would be a runoff in that race, but Dan Ryan looks like he's won it outright, so he will not be going.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Oregonian called it for him.
They did already. Well, God, they called it. Yeah,
so it looks like he will avoid a runoff.
Projecting it right out of the gate here. And I guess what Multnomah County says is they think they get roughly, as past elections show, about 50 to 60% of total ballots in that first sort of dump we just had right there, which is why you're seeing the check mark
and we're going to want
projection here.
Revisit this with, I know you want to weigh in here, Jesse, on some of these races, but we are going to be taking a break here and pause for us to be able to do some results over on KGW. So we'll pause the live streaming here just briefly, and we'll come back with our panelists and revisit some of these races. We'll be right back with you, but you can watch the results on KGW television.
Yeah, and right here too. We'll see you in a few. Number 2, followed by Stan Pulliam, the mayor of Sandy, and Dr. Bud Pierce, Salem oncologist, at 8% there. And on the Democratic side here, Tina Kotek there in the lead over Tobias Reed. A sizable lead there as this first tranche comes in, about 59% to Reed's 32% there.
And switching to Portland City Council, 2 open seats here for position 2. The Oregonians calling it for Dan Ryan. He's expected to keep his seat and not have to go into a runoff in November. Here's a look at City Council position 3. Joanne Hardesty is the incumbent. She's out ahead. These are again early numbers. The top 2 go on to a runoff in November.
We're running out of time here, but a quick check on one of our congressional races, House District 5. This is Jamie McLeod Skinner and Kurt Schrader. She is in the lead as those first results come in. And if we can flip over to the other side, we're out of time here, but join us right now on KGW.com. All right, welcome back to our special coverage of the Oregon primary tonight. You know, it's early, but we're getting a lot of results in quite early here, which is interesting to see. A lot to get to tonight, and I think we're going to pick up here with the Portland City Council race.
We're talking about City Council, and we were mentioning earlier that Dan Ryan's already been projected a winner, so he'll keep his seat, avoid a runoff. But this is a really interesting race, and I was talking to Jesse about it, and you were saying if you're Joanne Hardesty, you're pretty happy about these early numbers, right?
I think so. One, we know from the age demographics that the folks that turn in their ballots that are in this first wave tend to be older. We're going to see younger, more progressive voters come out, those votes counted later. So if I'm Joanne, I'm hopeful that my percentages go up. I think also, this is one of the races where we saw outside money come in. Both Joanne and Renee, and actually all 3 of these candidates were running under the public financing program, as was Dan Ryan and AJ McCreary, and we saw outside money come in to support Joanne's opponent and
Vadim with
and
Portland United, right? That pack.
Yeah, which in some ways was trying to split Len's argument, keep one incumbent but throw out the other one. Mm-hmm. But both Joanne and Dan have been clear about what they came to do and have for the most part done what they said they were going to do. So I'm looking forward to see how the night goes on.
Now we should just mention here the Oregonian projecting a runoff in that race. I mean, they have projected that Dan Ryan is taking position 2, but in the Hardesty race that there will be a runoff in that race as well. So we'll keep an eye on that one.
And Joanne Hardesty really saying she's the one who is getting things done. She started the Portland Street response. She championed the police accountability measures. So she was really positioning herself as the counselor who does get things done and is the progressive who really stood up for progressive values.
And she has arguably accomplished a lot of what she has set out to do. But then you have some of the other issues that came up, like her credit history and the fact that she didn't show up in court before the judge when she had an outstanding debt, and sort of people raising their eyebrows about, do I want an elected leader like that? You were about to say something, Len, about this race. What did you want to chime in with?
I think her numbers are going to come down a little bit. I think, notwithstanding what Jesse was saying, I think as the vote comes in throughout the city, I think she's going to her numbers will compact a little bit. But the important point I think here is that she had a base. That she started off with voters who had voted for her in the past, and they knew something about it. She's really one of the only city commissioners that you really can say you know what she stands for. And so, like her or not like her, you wind up kind of having that sense about it. She was able, I think this is one of the campaigns people are going to look at. She was able to kind of bottle something about her aggressive style and her advocacy that was very important for voters. And I was impressed with all of the mailings that I got that showed a broad range of support for her, both visibly, graphically, and also in terms of endorsements. So I think she ran the best with what she had. And again, I'll remind, we talked about before, starting at 18%. She was on the canvas, really.
Right.
And she kind of got up and basically, in the face of the voters really wanting to punish incumbency, she was able to fight through that. So that says something about her. And if she comes through this into the general elections, let's say she gets into a runout, she's going to carry a lot of momentum forward.
I know, because Horvik, the pollster, was saying it was about a 50% chance that he thought she would get into the runoff. So it'll be interesting to see if these numbers hold. We want to jump to the congressional races because we do have one that's called in the 4th district. The 4th congressional district, an open seat for the first time in 30 years. This is the seat held by Congressman Peter DeFazio, who's retiring. He's held the seat since 1987, and he endorsed Val Hoyle. And I think you told us, our producer, right, that the Oregonian has called Val Hoyle. She has, I think you said, Rebecca, 70% of the vote, of the early vote. She's the current labor commissioner. She spent more money than all of the other candidates combined in funds raised. And she will be taking down Alex Skarlatos, who has run twice before against Peter DeFazio. How does this set things up, Rebecca, between Skarlatos, who is the hero that was on the train that foiled the terrorist attack?
In Europe, right, in 2015,
how does this race look between Val Hoyle and Alex Skarlatos? Because he's unopposed in the Republican primary.
I love this race. I'm so excited about this race. Val Hoyle has really done a great job representing constituents when she served in the legislature. She's been a strong commissioner for Boley. But Skarlatos has great name recognition. He has a great story. He's worked very hard. He will get more financial support now that it's an open seat. I mean, an open seat immediately makes a campaign more competitive and a little bit more exciting. I do think it'll be a race that Republicans will be able to come together around and say, this is something we all need to support. He'll get support from other places in the state to take this on. But they represent very, very different ideals.
Yeah,
very distinct.
Is there a path for
ideals.
Republicans in this district, do you think, to take this seat?
I think it'll be tough, but there can be. I mean, I think the voters could be there if the campaigns are run correctly. And of course, that goes back to having the right amount of money. But you have two candidates that are, they're rooted there. This is not a, carpetbagger story of people coming in. They both have history and they're both known with voters now.
All right, let's jump in here. I want to move over to the 5th here because we haven't taken a close look at these numbers coming in. There it is, Jamie McLeod Skinner, 65% of the vote in that first batch that's come in. Kurt Schrader trailing at 34%. Again, we want to caution you, yes, it is early, and the 5th, a huge part of this is in Clackamas County, where they're going to be having that counting issue, so it may take days before we get the final numbers here. But 65 to 35 in that first batch.
But look at the numbers. There aren't very many.
Right?
There's only 20,000 votes there altogether. So that's not a lot of votes.
I wouldn't be too worried if I was Kurt at this point. Next time, in 1 hour when it comes in, if the numbers are still at this, then he's kind of like sweating.
Sure.
But, I think the early numbers indicate that she ran the kind of race that Jesse was talking about earlier, where the local Democrats were kind of concerned about this, kind of coming in from the outside.
And can we flip over to the Republican side and see how we're doing there with Jimmy Crumpacker there and Lori Chavez-DeRemer, again, early former mayor of Happy Valley on the left. Look at that's just 9,000 votes counted. And on the right side.
But
Jimmy
Rebecca was
Crumpacker.
saying earlier, you think Chavez-DeRemer is going to come out of this the leader?
I do, but I think it will be close. I think we'll see those numbers, come together, that marginal drop a little bit. But remember to what Jesse said, the early voters are usually senior voters. They vote within the first 3 days. Your more frequent voters, your 4 of 4 is what we call them on the inside, they vote early. And so some of these numbers you're seeing are the ones that got to the count early, and they're coming through. It's a pretty good snapshot of what those votes are. Even if you take out the Clackamas County issue, these are still rural votes that are coming in that I think, some of those margins are going to be tough to bring closer.
And we know from some of the sort of, to your point, some of the research that's been done and some of the numbers we've seen on reporting from the Secretary of State's office that we were sort of lagging behind in turnout over the last couple weeks. And then I think it was over this weekend and into Monday, all of a sudden, a bunch more votes that came in that got us sort of on par with maybe what we saw in the last midterm primary, potentially even exceeding that. So something to look out for here.
Well, at least we won't be the dismal worst voter turnout they were thinking that we might be.
Should we flip to the 6th, by the way?
Well, let's
take a look
at the 6th district. This is the open district, a brand new one after redistricting. And this is the one we were talking a lot about with Carrick Flynn and Andrea Salinas. Let's take a look at what the numbers again. Just not a lot of votes in yet, but Salinas way out ahead of Carrick Flynn, doubling the numbers there practically. But again, as you look at the totals there, that's not a lot of votes that are in. But can you tell a lot? I mean, you were saying, Rebecca, that sometimes you can see from these early numbers a percentage that holds. Do you think that could stand like that?
It typically, unless it's very close within about 7 percentage points, that's the margin we watch to say there's shift here. What comes in early is typically going to be a reflection of what you see at the end. Voting patterns and how they handle vote by mail. We had a blip in 2020 with, people being home more often, but it's usually a pretty good indicator of these early numbers.
And this is huge between Salinas and Carrick Flynn with her lead, 36% to 18% or 37 to 19%.
And we just took a look at the GOP side as well, just to bring you in on this. Mike Erickson, a supply logistics businessman, I think registering number 1. Amy Ryan Courser, number 2 there, and then Ron Noble is in 3rd right now, just a hair behind Courser, I think. So that's how that's shaping up. But again, Laurel, to your point, the vote totals are still relatively low at this point. You're laughing again here.
I think I'm going to exit stage right. I did not call that correctly.
We have a couple.
Good thing we're on the other
Get some
side.
more votes. We need some more. Don't you have some votes in your back pocket somewhere?
We have a couple more races with some numbers in that have been called. We're going to look at the sheriff's race first in Multnomah County. And the Oregonian has called it. Brandon, I'm talking to our producer, called it for Nicole Morrissey O'Donnell. And you can see the numbers there, 62.4%, 33.2%. Sheriff Reese, who used to be the police chief in Portland a while back, is term limited as sheriff. So this was an open race. The first time that Oregonian or Multnomah County residents have had a choice for sheriff since 2010. And it looks like it'll be Sheriff Morrissey O'Donnell.
And I believe she'll be the first female sheriff of Multnomah County as well.
That's right.
And this is an uncontested race. I think you wanted to go to the district attorney's race, which I know you are watching. Okay, we want to go to the one in Washington County where we have some numbers, right, Brandon?
So we're just looking at Marion County here.
But it's important that those are reflections of each other. That I think, Paige and Todd, that's an interesting race in reflection of what's going on in Washington County.
In Washington County, right. Those are the two DA races that you're watching.
Paige and Spencer Todd, and the incumbent, the DA, the hard on crime versus the public defender and so on, right? And seeing that mirror image with the Washington County candidates. And those races have been quite ugly as well.
Right.
The DA races in Washington and Marion.
And financed. People have injected some money into those races for the first time. Again, earlier we were talking about how important those races are.
And I think we're going to have the one from Washington County with Kevin Barton and Brian Decker, and they're calling it for Kevin Barton. 56.3%.
This is the Oregonian projecting.
This is Oregonian projecting Kevin Barton, the winner in Washington County. What do you make of that, Jesse? I know you're watching these races.
Yeah, this is the second time that Washington County has had a competitive race where you have a public defender coming forward. In 2018, a similar thing happened with a fair amount of money coming in. I think it's a reflection of the power of incumbency, as we've talked about, and 2, I think people are when people believe there's a problem with crime, they believe that district attorneys and police that talk tough about it are the solution. Before 2020, I think we've seen a lot of success in progressive DAs stepping forward and saying there's a better
Mike
way.
Schmidt
Exactly.
in Multnomah County.
And we saw a great victory there.
Sorry, guys.
Television can't help it.
And across the country, and I think people are trying to see whether it's we're able to repeat that in more suburban places.
Well, and I think what's happened in the last 6 years is district attorney races used to be nothing, right? Nobody talked about them. Everybody just thought they were an attorney on one side, and now they have become political figures. They have become a reflection of a public policy, a principle, and a culture that we've seen in the last 4 years, 6 years. I mean, how many times have folks talked about DA races? I've been hired to work on DA races, which is shocking to me because you didn't think that, but you're seeing in these two campaigns very significant public policy issues coming forward. And as you said, they're now showing their stance on crime, which directly connects to Black Lives Matter, which directly connects to homelessness, Measure 110, all of these huge public policy issues. I think it's a surprise to the system, really, that these campaigns have become so significant.
And I just want to bring up one other issue here, which may play a larger role in the general, but sort of to put us in the context of we have primaries in Pennsylvania and North Carolina and all these other states tonight, and that is abortion and that leaked SCOTUS draft decision, right? And trying to sense, does that impact, Rebecca, from what you're seeing, will that impact turnout in the primary in Oregon among Republicans, the abortion issue solely, or what do you think?
I don't think it'll impact the primary turnout because it's still sort of an unknown, but I do think it'll play significantly in the general election, specifically for the governor's race, right? You have two pro-choice candidates who are leading and have said, very staunchly where they stand and have a record of that, and you have one pro-life candidate who's very proud about that. That conversation is going to be big, and it's going to be big all the way down the ballot, right? The issue of abortion has always been a contested issue. Now people's emotions are heightened a little bit more. There's fear that's come back in. There's anger that's come back in. I think it'll be a significant issue for voters in the general election.
How does Christine Drazen, if she turns out to be the Republican nominee, and let's say Tina Kotek and Betsy Johnson, 3 women possibly in the general, how does Christine Drazen run her campaign as a anti-abortion candidate with 2 abortion rights candidates?
Yeah, I mean, she's going to have to be upfront with voters about where she stands on it, but then point to a record of supporting women's reproductive rights and women's health care and funding and, a more of a systematic, I should say, approach to supporting health care for women and women's rights and try to move away from the conversation of abortion itself. But again, we've seen candidates that try to flip or try to, get soft on something that won't work. Republicans won't like it, Democrats won't like it, and the huge population of non-affiliated voters want authenticity. So if I'm on, Christine Drazen's team right now, that's an issue I'm focused on, all the way up until the general election. How do we talk about it? How do we get voters to recognize our position as governor and how it's different than the Supreme Court? Oregon has some of the strongest abortion laws in the country. Where does the governor play a role with that? She's going to have to thread that needle very carefully.
I don't think he can soft pedal this. I think you've done a good job of describing what the challenge is for her, but I think it's going to be a defining issue.
Absolutely.
All summer long, much in the same way we had in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter thing. We're going to have a bunch of, I think, marches, engagement. I mean, campaigns love engagement, right? And this is one of these topics that really is going to increase engagement and excitement. And taking away a right really has some meaning that's very different from something else that we've seen before in American politics. So I think that's going to be a very big defining issue. To answer the question, will it matter in the race? Yes, it will. It'll matter big time.
I think it will. Prior to...
All right, guys, I'm just going to jump in here because the Oregonian has made another major projection tonight as we look at the Democratic race for governor there. The Oregonian projecting that Tina Kotek will be the Democratic candidate for governor in the state of Oregon come this November. So that's a pretty early call. We're about 8:30, and you can see the votes coming in. Tina Kotek, 56.5% there. Tobias Reed really trailing at 34%. Len Bergstein, your first reaction to this?
First reaction is that she is rewarded for the kind of campaign she ran. She ran to her base. She ran on a record of accomplishment, and she was able to kind of say, I'm the one who can get stuff done. And I think that resonated with folks. Tobias had a tougher argument arguing that, in fact, he was the outsider for change, and I think the voters just didn't quite buy that completely. So the question now is whether she's able to kind of take the momentum that she gets from this kind of pretty resounding victory and carries it forward. Can she keep her coalition together? Do any of them bleed off into Betsy Johnson's camp or somewhere else? And is she able to kind of keep that group together and march forward? That's the challenge that they've got in front of them. But it's a big win for her, and I think they'll be touting it a lot. She'll be out talking about the kind of campaign she ran, and that this is a validation of the fact that she looks like an accomplished politician.
And just to clarify, that is the Associated Press actually projecting that as Tina Kotek as the winner in that race. Rebecca, what does this mean then for whoever wins the GOP side here now that we've got Tina Kotek? I mean, arguably, she's been in Oregon politics for decades now and sort of at the helm of getting laws passed. And I mean, Laural, you've interviewed her so many times, so feel free to chime in here. I mean, she is in essence the establishment, right? And she's been in a debate with us, we've talked to her, and we sort of have said, well, how are you going to pivot? What are you going to do differently? How are you going to tackle homelessness? And she points to, well, we've done our job at the state, but it's the local level, it's the county level. So
well, let's just find out, too, when you add Betsy Johnson into the mix. Who does she hurt? Who does she help? I mean, we had Bud Pierce on the debate, that City Club that you're with, the City Club of Portland. Bud Pierce said during that debate that he thinks that Betsy Johnson is going to siphon off more votes from the Democrats, from Tina Kotek, than she will from a Republican nominee. And also then you hear the other side that Betsy Johnson is going to get more of the conservative money and the business money. So maybe she takes more away fundraising from the Republicans. How does this all fit together?
Well, I think that's a great snapshot of what, the assessment would be right now is Betsy Johnson really is a moderate candidate. She really has taken good votes, so to speak, on both sides of issues. If we were to have a general election that had Tina Kotek, Betsy Johnson, and Christine Drazen, it would be fascinating and historical, right? To have three really powerful women who served together in the legislature, who fought against each other exactly as they look on the ballot, or would look if Christine were to win. And now they have to go head to head, and it's going to be, record versus record versus record. I don't think we know yet where Betsy will pull votes from. I think the Roe v. Wade issue will have an impact. I think some Republicans that thought maybe they had permission to vote for Betsy because she was more moderate now feel like they need to hold on to that pro-life position with that candidate. Speaker Kotek is the establishment as far as, a pretty blue, pretty progressive Democrat. And so if you have anti-establishment Democrats that want to vote, who do they choose, right? Because Betsy's a little bit of the establishment as being a legislator that's been in there a long time. But, she's got a totally different approach to things. So I really don't know how to answer that.
And what about these unaffiliated voters? I was reading in the Oregonian that as of Friday, 93% of them hadn't voted. I'm sure that's more now that there's more have voted, but how does Betsy, energize, and really both parties have to get some of those non-affiliated voters, right?
And as Rebecca answers this, can we just take a look at the GOP race with Christine Drazen and Bob Tiernan and see where we're doing? There we go. Okay, so it hasn't changed too much. Right. They're relatively
She's a little bit more farther ahead of Bob Tiernan than she was in the last
2,
batch.
5. I think she gets to 7% margin over that. I think that's what I think she'll get to. But I think if Christine Drazen runs, she's got the most moderate approach of any of the candidates that are leading right now. And that's going to be helpful for her. But the unaffiliated voters, I think one reason they're not voting right now is their ballots aren't very exciting, right? If they got a ballot, it has a county commission, a city council, a bond.
Well, that's true, right? Because we have the closed primaries.
And judicial races, they have campaigns that nobody's heard about unless they're, in a district attorney race. But in the general election, their ballots are going to look as full as everybody who is registered for a party. I think people underestimate non-affiliated voters. A lot of folks have switched to non-affiliated voters. They seem like they're brand new voters if you're looking at polling and targeting because they came from a different party. Some folks just choose to stay there. I think a lot of folks are moving that direction. And I also think we have to remember that not every partisan voter votes partisan, right? I'm not a straight ticket Republican. There's a lot of folks that are out there, and a lot of non-affiliateds will, select a certain party as well. They just don't want to identify with one on paper.
Well, let me jump in on this governor's race, if I can, Laural. I think, first of all, Christine Drazen, if she comes out of this race, has the risk of being lost in a race with a couple of other big personalities. So that's going to be a risk she's going to have to figure out. And besides consolidating the Republicans behind her before she can jump off. Remember, this is going to be a gloves-off general election. Lots of money, lots of really attack. And the three of them aren't going to be the only ones talking. There will be independent expenditure campaigns, most likely a campaign that will be put together to try and bring a profile of Betsy Johnson forward that she won't like to look at when she sees it in the mirror. There will be people who will spend lots of money saying, you think she's the outsider? 20 years of X. And then there are going to be campaign ads just pounding and trying to kind of give voters a sense of who she is. And that'll be, I think, the dynamic in the race.
And to just jump in here, it's funny that she is not even on the ballot tonight, and we're spending so much time talking about her, which is testament to what an unusual election year this is. Jesse, just to bring you in briefly on Tina Kotek, your thoughts on her getting the Democratic nominee for governor there?
Well, I think she had a lot of folks behind her that knew that they would rather see her against Betsy Johnson than Tobias, because the choice would not have been as clear in terms of pulling out progressive voters in November. I think that she's a progressive, pragmatic person that knows how to work the wheels and the levers of government, and I think that people saw that she'd be able to do that as governor. I think when you put her against Betsy Johnson, I think I think much of the effort behind the People for Portland campaigns in many ways has been to help pull out and identify who are the Betsy Johnson voters that live in Multnomah County, because that's indeed what she's going to need to win.
And look, Tina Kotek is probably the smartest politician I've ever seen in action working in the state. She's extremely intelligent, very strategic, knows her voters, knows the issues. That's tough in a gubernatorial race. And then, as Len said, you've got a big personality with Betsy Johnson raising millions of dollars, running a campaign right now like it's the general. I see more of her ads than either of the gubernatorial, the Democrat or
Rebecca,
Republican.
we've got to jump in here because we have to do an update over on KGW television. So we're going to stop down, take a pause here.
You will see it here too, by the way. You will.
Yes,
going on
okay.
today.
And you can also watch the results on the bottom of your screen. We'll be back in just a moment with our analysis. The early results in Oregon's primary election.
And let's start with the race for Oregon governor on the Democrat side. The Associated Press has just called this race for Tina Kotek. You see it there. On the Republican side, no definite winner yet, but Christine Drazen is leading a crowded pack, followed by Bob Tiernan there.
Let's switch to the Portland City Commissioner race. There are 2 contested seats for position 2. It looks like Dan Ryan will keep his seat. The Oregonian has called that race, and he will avoid a runoff. And here's a look at City Council position 3. That's Joanne Hardesty's seat. She is in the lead, followed by Renee Gonzalez and Vadim Mozurski. The top 2 here will go on to a runoff in November.
Well, let's check in on some of our congressional races. This is House District 6. It is brand new for Oregon. Right now on the Democrat side, you see Andrea Salinas on the far left there in the lead. Carrick Flynn, number 2. On the Republican side, as these results continue to come in, Mike Erickson is out front. Ron Noble, State Rep Ron Noble, just behind him there, or substantially behind him, about 20% there.
And now to House District 5, where Kurt Schrader is the incumbent, but his challenger, Jamie McLeod-Skinner, is in front by quite a lot in these early results. And in the race for a Republican challenger in House District 5, Jimmy Crumpacker and Lori Chavez-Dreamer are, well, she's about 10% ahead right now.
Yeah, the numbers keep changing minute to minute here,
Yes.
which is the charm of election night as they come in. Okay, for analysis and insight on the big races, you can check out our election night streaming show. We are on right now live on KGW.com throughout the night.
And there you can also find the results in all of the primary races. We'll be back with more results later. Welcome back to Oregon primary election coverage here on KGW.com and on KGW's YouTube channel. We have a great panel with us, Len Bergstein and Rebecca Tweed, Jesse Beeson, and my partner here, David Molko. We're so happy to have you with us. We have some more races that we haven't shown you yet. We want to talk about. We're going to go to Washington County Chair. This has been called now for the incumbent, Catherine Harrington. It was a big decision for voters in Washington County whether to re-elect her to a second term or elect the challenger, Beach Pace. Pace is a Hillsborough City Councilor, Chief Executive Officer of Big Brothers Big Sisters. 11 of 13 mayors endorse Beach Pace because of an internal investigation done by Washington County about some allegations from some employees about bullying. But Catherine Harrington retaining her seat, is this a surprise to you, Len?
I think it is a surprise that it's able to be called this early. And Catherine's run as a for Metro Council. She's been on the ballot several more times than Beach has. Beach is a very aggressive and great candidate. I mean, there's a future for her beyond this race. She just didn't have a big enough base to start off and jumping point, and Catherine was able to kind of deflect the controversy that she had. So it's a surprise that they're able to call it this early.
Well, let's go ahead and flip over to Multnomah County as well, to the chair race there, and see what's going on there. Okay, Jessica Vega Peterson in the lead, 39%, well out front of Sharon Myron. Outsider Shariah Mayfield, Lori Stegman, all of those except Shariah are currently part of the commission. Shariah Mayfield really representing herself as the outsider who wanted to come in and fix things. Sharon Myron as the disruptor who said, hey, we know what to do to fix homelessness. We're not doing our jobs. We need to shake it up. But when we talk about that anti-incumbency, anti-status quo sort of vote, that we thought that, sort of that narrative early on that voters were feeling, disenchanted, like we needed to shake things up, that this wasn't good for the state of Oregon. That is not reflected in this vote at all.
And we should say, too, that this race is an open seat because Deborah Kafoury, who's the current chair, can't run again because of term limits. But the three commissioners who are currently on the commission are doing quite well. And Jessica Vega Peterson there with a healthy lead. Top two will go on to a runoff. But as you were saying, David, where is the anti-incumbent anger that we were talking about?
Well, and I think it's fascinating because some of the candidates, like a Beach Pace, who really reflects a lot of underrepresented communities, right? She's running against a woman who's been accused of bullying and some of the things that have become part of the anti-narrative we don't want. She should be the perfect candidate that anti-establishment voters or people that want to see different communities represented get behind. But again, I think voters will vote where they're comfortable. They vote, for incumbents more often because even if they don't know who they are, they feel like there's a sense of trust there. You also have to look at what those candidates have done. Jessica Vega Peterson has been a leader for a long time in her community and in the county. People know her. And you can throw all the money you want into politics and all the fancy numbers and everything, but at the end of the day, voters are going to vote for people they like. They're just going to vote for the person that they feel they can trust and that they like the most. And Jessica Vega Peterson's very likable.
And she led the way on the preschool for all that passed.
Yeah. So I'm not surprised at all that she's leading. I'm a little surprised that Lori Stegman is running in fourth right now. But I think it's a really important race. Look, we have 4 women that are running and making some really interesting noise, some interesting points. But I think the anti-establishment vote is going to bring out voters, that sort of frustration or anger, but it may not change the way they vote, right? And I think, we over-speculate or we over-assume that we know what that anger translates to, and we're seeing tonight, maybe it's not translating to anything different. Maybe people are picking the known right now.
And Jesse, what do you think? I mean, about the anger that things may not be working on the streets of Portland, or when it comes to the strategies around sort of, I'm not going to say solving because it's such an insurmountable issue, but tackling our homeless crisis in a meaningful way where people feel like they're seeing results. What do you think?
I think most voters take that and put that squarely on the shoulders of the city. And so in some ways the county gets off a little bit in shouldering that blame. I also think in many of these instances, we are seeing more and more organizations that aren't the party being that broker of information to voters to say, we endorse and we support this candidate. Right. So you're seeing a lot more of those community-based civic organizations getting involved and lifting up candidates. I think you can say the same for Catherine Harrington.
We're going to break away right now because Tina Kotek is giving a victory speech, winning the primary for the Democrats in the governor's race.
Make sure that we have places like Revolution Hall still with us today. So I want to thank everyone for coming here tonight. Some of you were here earlier, some of you just arrived. Thank you. Welcome to the celebration for Team Tina. It's wonderful to see you. I just want to take a brief minute to express my gratitude to a few folks. And I want to start with my wife, Amy. When we made this decision last August to run for governor, it was as a partnership to do this together. And she is an amazing partner who supports me in every way and also keeps me humble and helps me make sure we make the right choices. And I just love you, so thank you very much. I want to thank my team, my staff, everybody on the campaign team, including all of our wonderful volunteers for all the wonderful work that you've done to get here tonight. These are impressive numbers because of your hard work, so thank you very much. I want to thank all the partner organizations that have endorsed this campaign, representing thousands of Oregonians who believe in what we're trying to do with this campaign. And there are too many to thank right now, but I just want everyone to know that this is a team sport, and with those partner organizations, from labor to our reproductive rights groups, to our civil rights groups, to our groups that are fighting for justice every day in the state, thank you for supporting this campaign and making sure we could get here tonight. So thank you very much. And then honestly, everybody in this room, because you either gave money, volunteered, took my phone calls, made sure, when I was having a bad day, you're like, it's going to be fine. I love you all, so thank you very much. Thank you for standing with me and believing in me. It is not easy to run for office, and I want to say that I spoke with Treasurer Tobias Reed this evening. We had a nice conversation earlier, and he did call me a little while ago conceding the race, and we're going to work together to figure out how we move forward, because that's what's going to be important for the state. I want to thank him and Patrick Starnes and George Carrillo and Nick Kristoff and everybody who wanted to run and ran in this primary, because we need people doing this, and they have worked really hard because it's not easy to do. And can we get a round of applause for all the other candidates? Champagne, so we'll do a little toast at the end so you can hear the champagne getting popped. So, but let's be serious just for a second before we get to that. I think what's important to remember that all the Democrats in this race share a similar vision for what we want this state to be. So we're all going to work together to make sure we win, that I win in November, because frankly, there's just too much at stake. Because I'm being really honest with you when I say in November, everything we care about is on the line in November. Because this year is not just about a Democrat versus a Republican. This will be a three-way race for the highest office in our state. And this will be an election unlike any of us have ever seen. And whoever comes out of the Republican primary will be hell-bent on bringing our state backwards at a time.
Well, we have lost Tina Kotek addressing her supporters as she claims victory as the Democratic nominee for race for Oregon governor, winning out over Tobias Reed, the state treasurer. And
if we could take just a quick look at the GOP side here and see if Christine Drazen, former House Minority Leader, is still in the lead there over Bob Tiernan, if we can call that up when we get a second here. That lead looks to be about the same as it was earlier as these numbers continue to tick up. Here is the thing we have just noticed, and this is just off the Oregon Secretary of State website. It doesn't look like Clackamas County is reporting anything in any of these races, including the governor's race, including county commissioner, presumably in the 5th district for Congress as well, the Schrader-McLeod-Skinner race. So that is interesting. That's where we've been talking about this counting issue with the blurred ballot, the barcode, I should say, on the ballot, and they were saying it could take days. But right now they're not reporting anything. It is only 8:57, but zeros across the board.
Well, maybe at 9 o'clock. We'll hope at 9 o'clock they do a numbers dump for us.
That's 10% of the Oregon electorate.
Well, let's look at this, because you all were talking about looking at, hearing from some of the political insiders, Len, talking about some of the national outlets are saying that McLeod Skinner is going to win this.
Yeah, I mean, this early race, we still have votes coming in from Marion County and some of the other parts of the district that are big votes that Kurt Schrader should be stronger in than Jamie McLeod Skinner. But if you're at this point, Jamie McLeod Skinner's got to feel pretty happy about where they are. Now, the Clackamas County numbers will change everything. So
right, because he's from Clackamas County.
Yeah, we're not going to come. I don't think we're not going to come away tonight knowing the answer to this thing, and people are going to be looking at it and looking ahead. Remember, again, we said this earlier in the evening. This also will be looked upon as a referendum on Biden and his ability to kind of move the Democratic, agenda and candidates along in a general election. So
let me just jump in here too, Len. It looks like Marion County. I just checked the DA's race, but also Marion County not reporting anything, including in the Schrader-McLeod Skinner race.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of chunk of votes missing from that 5th district. And what we're
And if you
seeing
look at that, that's less than, 30,000 votes that we're seeing here.
And we don't know if this is predominantly from Deschutes County and her home base. Yeah. So again, if you're Jamie McLeod Skinner, you want to be really happy at this point. Kurt Schrader, you want to be nervous. But all of us on this panel have been in campaigns where we've kind of started off with a big smile on our face and that kind of like drains.
I don't ever start campaigns with a smile, but yeah.
To answer your question, though, just Deschutes County here, about 10,000 of that 17,000 for Jamie McLeod Skinner coming from Deschutes County.
Which says a lot, which is she's from Terrebonne, so that's her strength.
That measure here as we jump in. Did we look at the Metro race, the Metro Council president here? Because we're talking about that anti-incumbency vote
Peterson,
that we're not
incumbent.
really seeing across the way here. This is Lynn Peterson, the incumbent. And I think one of the things we've been talking about here is the sense that voters, it was 2020, right? The homeless bond, the housing bond, and sort of handed them a platter saying, yes, we're willing to pay for this. Can you get it done? And a lot of the criticism around this, Rebecca, has really been like, hey, we've kind of moved in this direction and we've given you this, but we're not seeing results. And if you look at these numbers here, I mean, she's well out front, 53%
and there are quite a few votes
to Alyssa
in there,
Pishka there.
And really, there once again, where's the anger about homelessness?
The anger, but Rebecca's kind of given us a kind of a code to be able to look through this. Lynn Peterson is clearly more well known.
Right.
Somebody voters would feel comfortable, even though she was rejected in the transportation bond at this almost right on the heels of winning the homeless bond. So you wind up having a fairly controversial executive, but someone that the voters have seen in action. So I don't know that you got to have somebody, you got to beat somebody with somebody, right?
Does this mean, though, that voters trust that these leaders, if elected, can get things done, can make these changes, or is it just that they trust them maybe more than their challengers? Is that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, I think this year I would be very hesitant to kind of say what voters were thinking about it. There's a mix of emotions. We know that they started off being very angry, and they've kind of looked over the field. Where could they put that anger? And in some cases, they didn't find a candidate that they could really kind of put their anger in. And so that's what we're seeing playing out. We'll be talking about this for the next couple of weeks, I think, because people will have different interpretations of what this means. If the county chair race, I agree with Jesse that the city gets more of a, kind of the credit or blame for housing stuff, but the county was a debate, the county chair was a debate of how you deal with this homeless issue and shelters and so on and so forth. And so you got to try and figure out whether to interpret the voters on that issue. This is I think people are going to be really nervous about what message to take from voters. We know that they are not as angry or haven't acted out the anger that we saw in January. And that tells you something about how voters can move, but it doesn't tell you much about where they are, I think, on this race.
And might we see more of that frustration in the general election when we have the two parties running against each other? Because there's a lot of predictions there'll be a red wave. Nationally, of course, Oregon hasn't seen that for a long time.
Oregon just does our own thing. It's one of the principles that we live on is we do our own thing, right? I think a lot of the anger that folks are trying to tap in becomes old news, so to speak, right? Early on, Republicans were running campaigns against Kate Brown. It's like, well, Kate Brown's not running again, right? There's only so much you can talk about that, and then you have to turn towards real issues. And Oregon is super diverse. There's a lot of really different issues. People are angry, but they also want results. I think voters, for the most part, especially in Oregon, very educated, very engaged, pay attention, recognize that change is not going to only happen in 2 years. Right? Just because we pass a measure or a measure fails or we elect somebody, there has to be some time to do it. And I think that's where anger / I'm going to sit in my comfort zone with somebody and hold them accountable. It may not be a vote out of excitement. It may be a vote of, okay, you've been here. You said you're going to do this. I'm going to vote for you and you better do it or else next time.
It is early. It is only 9:03. No results out of Clackamas or Marion County, 0. So those could come in any minute now. But Rebecca, I just want to ask you at this point in the evening, what's your takeaway from the primary so far, from what we've seen in terms of the numbers coming in?
My takeaway is that I think voters are still voting as expected, right? And I know we keep talking about that, but that's really important going into the general election. We're excited about the candidates that we're going to have, but I think the voting patterns that we're seeing in this primary really need to inform the strategies and the communities that particularly the gubernatorial races talk about and where they go into. Republicans are going to have to come into Multnomah County, right? They're going to have to talk to some of these voters that are making their voice heard in the city council races and the metro races and talking about some of these issues and really trying to get them to shift a little bit. I really think right now, when you're looking at the turnout in all of these elections, if I'm Betsy Johnson, I'm thinking I can win this campaign in November.
And why? Right? Why is that
because
her takeaway?
Because I think the diversity of the folks that are winning, even though they're incumbents, these folks that are running on a platform that says, this is what I've done and here's what I'm going to do and you can trust me. But it's a little bit of the difference, like Jamie McLeod Skinner leading. Even if those are early numbers, that's pretty significant. And she and Betsy Johnson have a lot in common. If I'm Betsy, I'm looking at it and saying, there's an opportunity to get non-affiliated voters and Republicans and Democrats to come to the middle for me. I'm not running because I'm angry. I'm running because I like to get things done. And that's kind of her motto, and that's what she's been known for in Oregon. That's what I think we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great analysis. And then I also want to say that, campaigns are not static. So what will happen after this election will change almost immediately. There'll be a whole new, almost twice as big electorate that will be voting in the general election. And they will be subjected to a whole different kind of pounding by the campaigns. So
do all the ads start right away?
Well, that's a real
Can we get a break?
No, you get a break. You get a break. There's golf.
They make golf. I think Betsy will continue to keep up. She's got to get 24,000 signatures to kind of get into the race. And we talk as though she's in the race now, but
she hasn't qualified yet.
Hasn't qualified yet. So, but then when you get those three in the race, really kind of an interesting, she didn't exactly get the race that she wants. She would have rather had Tiernan because a far right and a far left candidate opens up the path for her. So she got kind of, she
well,
got
she still might, because we don't know yet.
And she'll still,
Yeah, let's be clear. The race hasn't been called.
Votes
still coming in a lot of places on the Republican side for governor.
Exactly. Again, one thing you can say, if those are the three people in the race, the city of Portland's in for a drubbing in the general election. None of those candidates really have put Portland on their back and saying, I'm the champion for Portland. They've all pointed their finger at Portland and its problems. And
we heard Tina Kotek do that during the debate.
Even though she lives in North Portland,
saying
right?
that, really saying the mayor isn't doing the things that she should be doing.
Portland it'll be challenging a couple of months for the city of Portland, don't you think, Jesse? It's
absolutely. Like I said, I think people put a lot on the city, probably more than it can actually be in charge of. I think potentially if we see this People for Portland sponsored ballot measure to sort of redo the housing measure that we just passed in 2020, I think that will be a good barometer to see whether people are being gracious with the time it takes to solve a problem, or whether they really think they want to go a different direction in how this happens. And I think the national context will drive a lot of enthusiasm as well and help push turnout on all the sides.
And we haven't even talked about the House and the Senate and the legislature and all the BIPOC candidates that are running for different seats in the House. We really have some open seats and a balance of power right now with the supermajorities for the Democrats in both chambers. How do you think things are going to be shaken up? Do you have any insight into some of these legislative races, Jesse?
I mean, I have opinions. I don't know if they're insights, but
What
I
are
do.
your opinions?
Well, go ahead.
I do think
Opinions work.
I mean, I think that one, I moved here 20 years ago, and the legislature looked very different. It's just not as reflective as Oregon truly is. So it's incredibly exciting to see people, not just from the metro area, but from rural areas of all stripes, running and sort of throwing their hat in the ring, even if they don't make it through. We're looking at potentially 49 BIPOC candidates running for in November for various races, and that is unprecedented. So that's incredibly exciting to me. Whether Democrats hold their supermajority, I mean, I think that that remains to be seen. But I think we'll see a different crop, regardless of legislators that have never been there before, and that will bring new energy.
And that's something you both have talked about too, Rebecca. In one of our first conversations, that what is going well in Oregon question I asked you, you said, well, it's great that we have more diverse candidates, gender diverse, more female, more visible minorities running for office. And you, Len, have talked a lot about youth candidates or younger candidates or a new generation out there, which is what we're seeing tonight.
Whole new generation of leadership. It is very exciting. 35% of the legislature will turn over, and it'll just be new people. So it'll be very interesting. Leadership will be different, and so on and so forth. So we're looking. I think it will be a very interesting general election for the dynamics you're talking about here. There will be a number of firsts. We'll be rattling off a new list of firsts, I think, given these races. And some of the races will be very interesting because they'll be right around the suburban area. Lake Oswego will have the battlegrounds will be Lake Oswego, Milwaukee, Hood River. I mean, metropolitan Portland won't be necessarily a battleground, but there'll be the surrounding areas. There'll be a whole bunch of very interesting races kind of coming up for the legislature.
We have a few House races that we can run through and look at a few results. This one is the only one that's been called in House District 34, the Bethany Cedar Mill area. Lisa Reynolds is the incumbent there with 85% of the vote, so she has won that race. What else do we have? This is an interesting one. This is in House District 35, and Zelos Marchant, if he were to win this one, would be the first transgender legislator in the Oregon legislature. But right now it looks like Farah is ahead there, Chechi. House District 38, Daniel Wynn, Neelam Gupta, and Wynn is ahead there in that District 38 race. And we have one more. This is Mayor Mark Gamba. Wow. This is an open race. Gamba way out ahead. He is the mayor of Milwaukee. And this is Karen Powers' former seat, right? Yeah. She decided not to run again because she said that legislators just aren't making enough money and she couldn't make it work. Yeah. So Gamba jumped in, and it looks like he is holding a healthy lead there over Castile.
Some people will look at some of these races that you've went through and that you've just gone through and talk about the fact that there's a moderate versus a progressive. These are primaries, obviously, and then they'll play themselves out in the general. So some of that's playing itself out here, much like it's playing itself out in other parts of the country in some congressional races we talked about at the very beginning of the show. So there's a lot of interest in those races, and people will be looking at them. And
can you draw any conclusions from what we saw as far as the centrists versus the progressives?
It looked to me like the centrists are winning.
And there's a PAC, right, that has formed. Oregonians are ready.
One on each side. Brian Clem has put one together, and then I think Greg Walden has gotten a PAC that also is trying to, we're ready for more balance or something like that. So there's a couple of PACs that are self-defining themselves as trying to elect more centrist and in some cases more Republican candidates to the legislature.
Because the argument in the Oregon legislature, as we're seeing in Congress, is that both parties have moved to the sides, to the fringes, and there aren't as many moderates to make compromise.
You're exactly right. The flip side of that is, of course, someone like Tina Kotek is able to move a progressive agenda through for exactly that reason, and she's able to then leap up into the gubernatorial campaign by virtue of that kind of accomplishment. So
Go ahead.
No.
I was going to jump in here. Sorry, Len.
No.
We talk about the race for governor, and we had an update with a few numbers tracking in the GOP side. And it looks like, although the tallies have gone up, it looks like the percentage is what we're seeing is staying relatively consistent here with Christine Drazen out front, almost 24.5%. Bob Tiernan still about 20%, and then the mayor of Sandy, Stan Pulliam, well behind Bud Pierce in fourth. But these seem to be relatively consistent as the reporting comes in.
Rebecca said earlier that we kind kind of like Oregon does its own thing, and that's true for Republicans, I think. In many other parts of the country, the loudest, most angry voice would win the Republican, and she's not the loudest and angriest voice when just looking at that list of candidates. So it'd be interesting if she holds on to that.
Rebecca, did you have something you want to say about that?
Well, I was just going to add, I think it's interesting that Bob Tiernan is in second place, right? Bob was involved in politics 20 years ago. I think he was the chair of the Republican Party when I first moved back to Oregon. Haven't heard the name that whole entire time, and all of a sudden I'm getting texts at 2 a.m, who's Bob Tiernan, should I vote for him? Because he started ads 2 months early. And frankly, that's how campaigns work. That's why Carrick Flynn started to make, the radar. Nobody knows who he is until we see him on TV. I see him on my YouTubes. I see him everywhere. So I think it's really interesting that, Bud Pierce has been running for 2 years. He's run before and lost. Stan Pulliam has been a loud candidate and stands proudly behind that for over a year and a half. And then Bob Tiernan comes out of nowhere 3 or 4 months ago.
How do you explain that?
I think it's just running a aggressive campaign. He's running towards the base, but just, preventing himself from going over the edge like a few of the candidates. That's what I would describe as moving to that extreme, but really tapping into Republicans that are angry, that really want your pretty standard ticket, standard platform Republican to run. And Christine Drazan doesn't bring that kind of energy. She's just not that kind of politician. But I think it's really interesting that he's leading. I wouldn't have had him in the top 2.
And she beat back that Rhino charge by Bridget Barton also. So she,
Republican in name only.
Yeah, right. So she ran she got to give her credit for running a pretty good race in a very complicated Republican
David,
primary.
you were talking about no results from Clackamas County, but we have a few results. Catherine Cook standing by live, and you have some results hot off your paper that you have there, like the whiteboard.
Wow.
Show us the numbers you have.
Yeah, they're pretty minuscule, guys. We have about just over 10,000 votes counted at this time, which is extremely low for Clackamas County or any county. But the circumstances, as we've been telling you all night, hinge on the fact that a lot of those ballots have needed to be filled out, counted by hand. Duplicated is the word I'm looking for, because of the faulty barcodes and the ink. And if you Here, let me stop talking and just show you a visual aid behind us. These bins here are the plastic bins that have come in from the collection sites just tonight alone. You can see there are a lot of ballots in those bins. They haven't even touched them, and they won't count them tonight. They're just going to verify signatures. But until we have a total count of ballots received, we won't really have a percentage of ballots counted. I know this is quite confusing, but hang with me here. What I can tell you is as of yesterday, they had about 65,000 ballots collected. Today, as of noon, they added about another 16,000. And again, behind me, these bins that they collected tonight at 8 o'clock, they're going to count those up eventually. But again, the process is going to be extremely tedious and long, and they're just hoping for results sometime before June 13th here. But at this point, they're not making any predictions or promises as to when they will have official results. All we know is that starting tomorrow, they're going to have two shifts of 5 hours each to count the votes and to process them until it's done.
All right, Catherine, thank you. We should also mention Marion County delayed, no results were in. Now they are starting to come in. They haven't quite hit the Secretary of State's website, so they're not going to show up on the ticker and on the results board yet. There's a little bit of a lag there. But when we talk about Clackamas, the county clerk actually came out and said a few days ago, hey, if your ballot is received by Monday, we're going to make sure it's all counted and report at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night. That was an hour and 15 minutes ago. I mean, clearly that's not happening here. So we're just looking here on the 5th District on the Schrader-McLeod-Skinner Democratic primary there, and Clackamas not reporting anything.
Which is a big deal, because that's a big chunk of the voters in the state and big chunk of voters in that district. So we may not know results in the 5th District.
Can we take a look at the 5th, by the way, as we're going through?
Right, Schrader voters. He's from Canby, so from Clackamas County. And we mentioned, even though Christine Drazen's ahead, that a lot of voters in Clackamas County will also likely lean her way. Here we're looking at McLeod Skinner and Kurt Schrader. So I think those are pretty much the same numbers that we had earlier.
A friend of mine was watching the Clackamas race.
And the Republican side has been called on this.
Is that the Oregonian or the AP projecting this?
Oregonian calling Lori Chavez Dreamer, and Rebecca, you had predicted that, the former Happy Valley.
I got one right so far.
Right. So she will be taking on whoever wins that Democratic primary between McLeod Skinner and Kurt Schrader.
It's going to be an interesting race to watch.
Do we have the labor commissioner? I'm just asking our producer.
Exactly.
We haven't heard anything about the labor commissioner. A statewide nonpartisan race, which is an open race because Val Hoyle has this seat right now, but she, as we said, is running 4th district, and she won the Democratic primary in the 4th district. So it looks like Christina Stevenson here, way out ahead.
And there are other candidates here. They're just not on the board here. So this is a nonpartisan runoff sort of situation where if Christina Stevenson doesn't hit 50% +1, then there will be a runoff in that race. But she got a bunch of several of the endorsements here, has a long background in this area, and has worked with the Labor Commission before. I think Portland City Auditor, if I'm not wrong, Simone Reddy, the Oregonian, projecting that she has won that race against Phil Sessler,
you don't hear a lot about this race. I had these two on Straight Talk, and we talked about this because I just think, it goes so under the radar, but it's such an important position because it's the watchdog of City Hall. They watch the efficiency and performance of bureaus and programs, and so it's important to have someone that knows what they're doing. She's a performance auditor in the past. She's a senior auditor for Metro, and this is the first time Portlanders have had a choice as an auditor for I think 3 decades, and Mary Hull Caballero, who is the current auditor, decided not to run again. But you hear them doing audits and everything, so it's a really important position, and it looks like
butt our heads against the city council.
That's right.
Yes, exactly.
It's become a very, as you say, very appropriately high-profile race. Let me just say one more thing about this Labor Commission race, and I'd be interested in other people's comments about this. I think this is a situation where Jessica Gomez picked the wrong race to run in. If she had run in the Labor Commissioner's race, my guess is we'd be talking about her as, at least in a runoff, with Christina Stevenson.
And Jessica Gomez running for governor as a Republican. She is a moderate. Some have called her more of a Rockefeller Republican of sorts down in Medford, CEO of a tech business there. So interesting.
So I don't know.
I think you're right, and folks talk to Jessica Gomez about running for commissioner or running for something different. She absolutely needs to be in leadership. I think she does represent a pretty large slice of the pie of Republicans. They're not voting for her in this primary because they didn't think she could win the primary, right? Republicans are making calculated votes about who can win and then who can win in November.
By the way, she's the 9th candidate, number 9 on the list. Drazen, Tiernan, and on, and then Gomez is 9. Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, that's exactly it. I think she does represent, a certain body of the Republican Party on that huge spectrum that we've talked about of where Republicans and Democrats sit, but not enough believe that she could win further down this election, further down the ballot. She needs to continue running for other things. Maybe she'll run for the legislature again and make that a little bit more diverse. But she's a voice we need. But sometimes candidates don't run in the seat that they should be running in. It just happens.
But they get their name out there, and they get political experience and in running a campaign and in debates. So there's value in that, isn't there?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
State treasurer's race.
I'm just wondering, as we're 21 past 9 here, if we have any more results out of Multnomah County, and specifically in the city commissioner race with Joanne Hardesty there, if those numbers have changed at all, if we can pull that up and see where we are sitting. I'm looking at county chair there, which seems to be sitting relatively consistent. Laural, those look like about the same as what they were. I'm looking over your shoulder, viewers. We've got a kind of a preview monitor.
And here's City of Portland. We've been talking about this. Commissioner Dan Ryan, the incumbent, he won a couple of years ago in a special election to finish out the term of the late Nick Fish, and he was running again. Now he's running for his first full 4-year term, and it's been called, the Oregonian called it for Ryan, that he will avoid a runoff and go on and keep working on his safe rest villages that he's trying to get. He had one open already. He's trying to get more of them open by the end of the month.
And here we go with Joanne Hardesty's seat. Actually, the percentages look nearly identical. I don't know if the numbers have ticked up at all, but you see her out front. Nearly 40%, and then Gonzalez and Mazursky really behind. And at this point, although again still early, it could be a toss-up between Gonzalez and Mazursky on who goes
That's very
on to
close,
the runoff,
isn't it?
right?
Very close. And the last update, what we're being told from Multnomah County, was at 9:02, so about 20 minutes ago.
It's interesting, too, because the Oregonian and some of the other media outlets everyone's doing these interviews and running around, they said both of those two, Gonzalez and Mazursky, are essentially saying the same things. They're just saying them differently. So maybe that's what we're seeing resonating.
And what do you think, Jesse?
Or maybe some vote splitting going on, right?
What do we see going into the general with Joanne Hardesty if she prevails here with one of those other two gentlemen?
Yeah, I think if Joanne is facing Renee, the choice is a little bit easier. Like the kind of race she's going to run is definitely going to be around some of the positions that Renee's taken that I think are a little bit more conservative. I think if we see the Metro measure to sort of repeal and replace the homeless measure, then Joanne's running on homelessness whether she wants to or not.
So that's the People for Portland
the People
measure
for
they're
Portland
trying to get on
Metro
the ballot.
measure, yes.
And when you
absolutely.
talk about Gonzalez, you mean his sort of tough love sort of comments he's been making, a little bit more aggressive than someone like Mazursky has been making.
Exactly. And I think that Joanne is going to benefit from more progressive turnout in Portland in November.
Will the grassroots get active behind Joanne going into the general election?
Yeah, and I think we also will probably see a charter change on the ballot, and you'll see a lot of energy and passion coming from all kinds of groups around that issue, and Joanne has been at the front of that conversation for many years.
Well, we see a lot of money. We've already seen a lot of money in the primary from Portland United. Is that the group, the PAC group that put money into Vadim's race?
They are very interested in seeing Joanne defeated, so I think absolutely we will see more money from them.
Your take, Len?
It'll be a wild race if whoever's in that race. Joanne is the picture of people's concern about the direction of the city. At the same time, she engenders a tremendous amount of affection and admiration and support from her base. And so it'll be a very tough race. I agree with Jesse's interpretation. I just my guts tell me that Vadim's going to kind of come out of this as the second person in this race, just by the basis of the way the dynamic has gone on in the city. There are some areas of the city we haven't seen the votes come in yet, so we'll see as that works. But the surprise for me is if Joanne is number one. I told you earlier, even before we were on the air, that I thought she'd get in the race, but she'd be number two. She wouldn't be the top winner. If this is true, she's done a really good job with her campaign.
On that note here, any other surprises we are seeing? Again, we're still waiting on all the Clackamas votes and looking at the congressional races with Schrader and McLeod-Skinner. But at this stage, based on what we know, Rebecca or Jesse, anything that's standing out as notable, or voters vote the way they always vote, which is kind of what I'm hearing?
If Jamie McLeod-Skinner pulls it off, we're talking about unseating an incumbent that has been in Washington for quite some time.
There'll be quite a buzz about that.
Quite a buzz
nationally.
about that. And I think she has plenty of experience in rural Oregon, having run against Greg Walden, and I think outperforming in many ways where people thought she would be. And she actually gets in that camper and gets around the state. I have been in Eastern Oregon, I have been in Southern Oregon, I have been in Central Oregon, and they know Jamie. And that, I think, says something about the way that she ran her campaign, and the fact that Kurt Schrader is not in the state this evening on election night, I think is exactly, it is a metaphor for the critique of his leadership.
So he had a lot of ads on. He outspent her, last I looked, 12-1. I mean, how did she get her message to rise above his message, even with the president's endorsement?
And he had a lot of outside PACs spending money as well. The Home Builders Association, I know.
Negative ads against Jamie?
Yeah. I think that because Jamie has been in communities across the state for quite some time, and she shows up and says what she says she's going to do. She's also worked tirelessly for other candidates that she's believed in, and that, I think, has made a difference. And when you have all county Democrats rising up in support of you, I think it shows grassroots support. And I think that's the kind of thing that at least in the primary, can mean a lot.
Do you think there's something here, too, about a candidate being authentic to who they are, or at least a voter sensing that? Because this has been really, I mean, for Kurt Schrader, who has been a moderate and sometimes has even opposed some of the president's votes, even though he has his endorsement or priorities, I should say. He's, tacked to the right, definitely to the right of McLeod Skinner, but he sort of positioned himself as saying, hey, I'm back here, I'm one of you. I think there was an ad where he was lifting a bale of hay, and McLeod Skinner called him out on it. And I think the quote was something like, she said this to his face, I think in a Willamette Week endorsement interview, I have shaken your hands, you have very soft hands, right? In essence, this is not who you are, this is not the real Kurt Schrader. So there's this just authenticity that I mean, am I getting at something here?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, Kurt hasn't been home in the district in a very long time. I think he thought he was representing a relatively moderate district, and yet bucking the pharmaceutical reform was a huge gaffe when you think about what issues motivate people, and healthcare is top of mind.
And McLeod Skinner's really tried to tie him to big pharma.
Exactly. Well, not tied. I mean, she just showed what's there.
I do think, we also have to think about which voters are voting, right? To Jesse's point, are they more progressive voters? Are they women Democrat voters, right? Those are some of the strongest turnout voters we have in Oregon, more so than in a lot of places in the country. The women's vote here is extremely strong, especially where McLeod Skinner is running. Now, personally, I live in Washington County. Kurt Schrader's not on my ballot. I'm in CD6. I haven't seen a single thing from McLeod Skinner, but I see 4 or 5 ads from Kurt every single night. So I do think watching for this Clackamas County votes come in, watching for the Marion County is going to be very telling.
Right.
So I'm skeptical of calling it, but I think everything Jesse said is absolutely correct. And David, to your point, she's a very authentic candidate, right? And you can't call that into question. If you do, they just, authentic candidates or just say, well, this is who I am. Betsy Johnson has that going for her, right? Whether people like her or not, Betsy Johnson is Betsy Johnson. There's no question about where she stands on issues. Congressman Schrader doesn't have that going for him. He's run a couple ads. There's the ad where he's got the puppy at the end and said, we approve this ad. Nice try. Like, it's cute, but every single person who's seen it has said, well, that's not really like a real thing. So, I think that is what's coming across is authentic versus inauthentic, but which voters are going to come out and vote and then how many.
Again, we have to say that we're only seeing about 30,000 votes. So right now, McLeod Skinner is ahead, and there's some political groups that are saying, or national groups saying they think that McLeod Skinner is going to win this in the Cook report, but we don't have the numbers yet. We have a lot of numbers outstanding in Clackamas County and Marion County. We think a lot of these numbers you're seeing from McLeod Skinner coming from Deschutes County, which is her home county. So this is the speculation if she
Not to
were to
bury
win.
Kurt Schrader yet.
Right.
All of these years, he has represented his district. What's happened is the district got redrawn, and he lost some of the people who he had spoken to the most, and there's our new voters that he hasn't ever talked to before. So there's something to be said about how redistricting also goes. I think the pharmaceutical issue plays itself big. It obviously plays itself big in the 6th congressional district also. It's a very big issue, and I think it had a telling influence.
Much more ahead because it's a busy night, but stay with us. We're going to flick through some of the results here. We got an update coming to TV and to you here. Laural and I will be back with the panel just after that. Stay with us here on KGW.
I'm glad you were watching.
Thank my kids. Isaac, Christian, and Ava are here tonight, and they have been extraordinary through all of this process, and they have been willing to let me tell stories and do my absolute best to stand up for them and all the other families out there just like ours that are impacted by the place that our state finds itself right now. So I just want to thank my family for everything that they've done, the way that they have stood with us as we fought for the future of our state. I also want to thank the team that has actually made this night possible. Our staff is extraordinary, but more than anything, in addition to that, the people that have come together, that have said, this is our chance, this is our year to lead Oregon in a new direction. You guys are here tonight. Time, talent, treasure, heart, prayer, commitment. I'm just grateful for all of it. So I promise I'll be back up in a few minutes. I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for being here.
Let us start with the Republican side of the Oregon governor's race. No definite winner yet. Christine Drazan is leading right now, followed by Bob Tiernan there, Stan Pulliam, the mayor of Sandy, in third. On the Democrat side, the Associated Press has projected Tina Kotek as the winner. We've also heard from her in that race.
In the Portland City Commissioner race for position 2, it looks like Commissioner Dan Ryan will keep his seat. The Oregonian has called the race. He will avoid a runoff in November. And here's a look at City Council position 3. That's Joanne Hardesty's seat. She is in the lead, followed by Renee Gonzalez and Vadim Mazursky. Top 2 go on to a runoff coming up in November. We're continuing our live streaming coverage on KGW.com and on the KGW YouTube channel.
Yeah, watching the results come in right now. Clackamas County not reporting anything. Primary results on our webpage. Reaction from candidates coming up as well on KGW News at 11. We'll see you then. All right, welcome back to an exciting night of Decision 2022, the Oregon primary. I'm David Molko, along with Laural Porter here, Jesse Beeson, and Rebecca Tweed. Len Bergstein, thank you guys for joining us here. A lot coming in. We're still missing results from a lot of places, including Clackamas County, period. But we do have some in from Marion County in the DA's race there. And looking at that, the incumbent Paige Clarkson ahead of her challenger Spencer Todd. They're 54% to 46%. Those numbers still look relatively low. What are we looking at? 17,000 votes, at least to me. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. But that's our first glimpse at Marion County of what's going on there, mirroring slightly what we were seeing in Washington County's DA's race, with the incumbent pulling ahead of the challenger, a public defender there. I think we also have the Beaverton school bond measure, right? Not a lot of measures out there, but there we go.
And this is one, Len, you were talking to us earlier when we were talking about the race, that you'd be watching this because there aren't really very many measures. This is the only one that really stands out. And you said this would be indicative whether people are really feeling like they want to be supporting funding measures. This is, and I guess Beaverton, really voters usually vote for these things, and they're passing the school bond. This is a $723 million 30-year bond measure that would go into 6 areas of the schools: modernization, deferred maintenance, security, other equipment, seismic upgrades. So this is a vote of support for the Beaverton School District.
Yeah, if the results were reversed, we'd be talking about this as a key indicator of where voters are and the end of the appetite for just spending. So this is a big plus.
And schools, as you've said, the schools in Beaverton, they're really important to the residents there.
It's a part of the culture, I think. Yeah, so this is a good vote, and it augurs well for generally schools as important in a year when education wasn't exactly a tracking issue. Nobody got real traction. Tobias tried to make it an issue, and nobody else really talked about it very much as the big issue. So to see a yes vote on a school bond is really a very positive.
Do you think education will percolate farther up during the governor's race, though? Will we hear more about education, or is that going to get drowned out?
Things are so big, just inflation, COVID, homelessness, crime, gas prices, just crime.
Because I know when Christoph was running, before he couldn't run, education was really big for him. He was really pushing that.
It may become a big issue, and again, as we were talking about just a moment ago, if you've got 3 pretty outstanding candidates for governor, they're going to be looking for ways to kind of differentiate themselves. I think education is going to be one of those issues. Betsy has already said that one of the worst votes that the legislature took was the Student Success Act, so she's going to have to defend that.
Which was a Tina Kotek.
Exactly. So it'll
appeals
be
to the right. It appeals to the Republican voters.
Yeah.
Her stance on that appeals to Republicans. If you go back polling for 30 years, education was the #1 issue in every single poll. Candidate walks in, you say, we're talking about education whether you went to or not. David, when we talked earlier this year, it's quality of life, right? People are worried about whether they can afford food, find baby formula, afford gas, pay their bills, get a job. We're still recovering from COVID. I think the governor's candidates and even congressional candidates and legislative candidates will have to talk about education. But for the most part, I think people are still looking for solutions to problems they're facing every day that we all have in common. Right, we're all impacted by those issues.
And that's sort of
now.
As we kind of wrap up here with and get final thoughts from all of you. There's a lot outstanding here. I mean, the Republican race for governor, some of the congressional seats still up in the air. We don't have clear results, I think, on Multnomah County Commissioner and Metro Chair and so on and so forth. I mean, the list is just ongoing as we wait for the results to come in. But one thing that we all seem to be feeling is sort of that anti-incumbent, Oregon's on the wrong track sentiment has not materialized, at least not in the results we've seen so far at the ballot box. So, Jesse Beeson, your takeaway tonight at this point as the results still come in?
Well, broadly, I love elections. There are moments in time when
and we love having you here.
There are moments in time when we get to see if this democracy experiment in our country is working. And so I always love being here and talking about those elections. So thank you for having me. I think that we're going to see this sort of anti-incumbent sentiment really take hold in November, and this sort of question come up. I very much look forward to that conversation in November.
Did you say you heard from Kurt Schrader's campaign that he is here?
Yes.
in Oregon.
Thank you.
So it was mentioned earlier that he wasn't in Oregon, but you're hearing he indeed is here in Oregon.
Conflicting reports. We will work on that and try to find out where we're at. I don't think we're going to see any victory speeches in that race tonight based on Clackamas County there. Rebecca, your kind of thought as we leave it tonight.
You know, we've talked about the gubernatorial candidates and where they sit with the base and unaffiliated voters and non-affiliated voters. Every single race needs to be paying attention to that large segment. The congressional races, they need to be focused on those non-affiliated voters and find out, are they anti-establishment, are they angry, or are they hopeful? That's what voters and candidates are going to have to be tapping into as we go into November.
There's over 1 million of those voters in Oregon. Right?
Yeah, and a lot of folks are there by choice, not by default. And so why are they there? I also think it will be probably the most expensive campaign cycle that we've ever seen. Campaigns are more expensive to run, but when you have folks like Tina Kotek and Betsy Johnson and what it looks like right now would be Christine Drazan, they can bring in a lot of money. They're going to have to spend a lot of money against each other. That's going to trickle down to these other ballot races. It'll be an expensive year.
The congressional elections as well, the match-off between.
So then there's the conflict of, do we want campaign finance reform or do we not? Because we need to win campaigns. They cost money. I think it'll be fascinating to watch.
I wonder if before we get to Lem, because you mentioned big spending, it made me think of the 6th District in Carrick-Flynn. Do we have any new numbers on that with Salinas and Flynn? Because that was kind of surprising the last time we saw that Salinas was so far ahead.
And we hadn't seen the Marion County numbers populating through the graphics and the ticker here. Here's what that looks like. It's kind of looking relatively consistent. I don't even think those numbers have gone up much.
Right, there are not a lot of, if you look at the total number of votes there's not a lot there. There's a lot missing right now. So right now, though, Andrea Salinas with doubling up on Carrick-Flynn, which even at that small number, you'd think with all the money that was spent, how much money per vote was spent with the PAC, the super PAC from from Sam Bankman-Fried in support of Carrick-Flynn, and then this is the result so far.
And I should correct myself there. I think Marion County looks like is reporting into this race right here. So even in Marion County, according to the Secretary of State, just the breakdown, Andrea Salinas, 25% of the vote that's been counted. Carrick-Flynn, 18% in second. Cody Reynolds, 15 in third. So just from some perspective there.
So a lot of money you were talking about, Rebecca, all the money that was spent. So maybe we're just seeing the beginning of that as we move into the general election. I'm hearing from our... Okay, so Carrick-Flynn, our producer was just telling me that he just tweeted congratulating Andrea Salinas on a win. Has the race been called for her?
Well, he says...
Not been called, but he is tweeting. Can you read the tweet? Do you have the tweet there?
Yeah, he says, thank you to my supporters. Obviously, these are not the results we were hoping to see tonight. I will be out there knocking on doors and calling voters as a volunteer for her campaign. Okay, that's interesting. He's conceding even though...
So if Salinas wins, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, she said that Oregonians cannot be bought. I mean, is that a big backlash against all the money, Len, that was spent in this race?
And it looks like we might have just had a projection here. Okay, the Oregonian projecting for Salinas here. So this makes sense now.
So Andrea Salinas, I mean, that's, how do you explain that?
It's a great vote of confidence for Andrea Salinas and the strength of her campaign. And on the issues that you're talking about, Oregonians, at least in that district, couldn't be bought and actually may have been turned off by the amount of money that was sent by outsiders and kind of shadowy characters and so on and so forth. But having said that, I think what my comments are in terms of this would be that I think we've entered a different era of Oregon politics. All of us remember a different era when we knew more about the candidates. We knew about a defining story about Oregon. We really don't have that going into the general election. We have new candidates. Some of them are unknown. Some of them have been pushed up by other forces, financed forces. And we really don't have any real sense about where we're going as a kind of a common story about Oregon. And that's what I'm looking for in the general election. Somebody's got to hit on that, and I think that'll be a winning note.
I was just wondering who Salinas was going to be running against in November on the Republican side. If we can flip that over to the GOP, not called yet, but if we can look, again, this is the new district. Mike Erickson there.
Is that a surprise, Rebecca? So far ahead of Ron Noble.
Becca's favorite.
I just can't.
And how do you explain that? How did Mike Erickson pull out ahead?
Well, he campaigned heavily in the period of time that we had our ballots. I was telling these guys when we were off camera, I have 7 mailers from Mike Erickson and there's signs everywhere. Now, I know Mike Erickson, I know all these folks, so I, know how I'm voting. But if you're a new voter and you're thinking about this and you hear from one candidate, you don't hear from the other, that's kind of how campaigns work. He has a history with the Republican Party.
He was a nominee before, wasn't he, in one of the districts?
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah, I guess we'll have to see. I mean, I don't think Ron Noble he clearly didn't spend as much money.
Right.
And he focused a lot on the more rural areas that knew him. But sometimes that doesn't always work. But I am surprised. I would have assumed that Ron Noble had it.
It's clearly a race that the Democrats want. They'd rather have him than Noble in this race. So I think in terms of the matchup, it's probably what Democrats want.
And if Salinas were to win, she'd be the first Latina legislator in Oregon's congressional delegation, right? And we've also, I don't know that we've mentioned that district has the largest percentage of Latino voters, 21% in that district. So that may give Salinas an edge going into the general election.
You know, Republican or Democrat, I think it's a wonderful period of time where we have candidates that are running, that are representing these populations that have been growing and expanding and engaging, but not had a voice there. And so I think it's lovely that, you know, if Salinas is the nominee, that she can give a voice to some of those voters. We saw it with Rep. Alonzo Leon trying, you know, to share that same message. So I think even Republicans need to be excited, getting away from the competitiveness of the campaign to say, as Len said, it's a new era. And, you know, we need candidates that, you know, are representing different communities. And I think that's great.
And these are candidates, in many cases, that we don't know. And so the risk is that there will be these independent expenditure committees, other people who will take over the debate and the narrative in a campaign. I think voters have to be really alert this general election, because stories are going to be told about the candidates. They're not going to know everything about the candidates, so they're going to be, the risk is that they'll buy what they hear. And so, you know, this is going to be I think the general election where the voters are really going to have to step up and pay very close attention in order to have the best results.
It also means we're going to have a very, very busy few months here.
Yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. You know, we talked about voter turnout being relatively low, about what it was in non-presidential elections. But do you think it's going to be good turnout? You think people are going to be motivated and energized to come out in November?
Absolutely. I mean, I do think voters follow a pattern, right? And they've done that this whole entire, 18 days we've had our ballots. They always vote the last day the most, last 3 days. Democrats vote more in the last 2 days than Republicans. I think it'll follow suit. I think we'll have a great turnout because we have so many exciting campaigns, and we are looking at, I think our voters are some of the smartest, most engaged in the country. They always show up. They're going to have a lot of reasons to show up. So I think we'll see very high turnout in November. I really do.
Roe. There'll be the Supreme Court decision will energize, engage people tremendously. The climate, I think, was going to be a big issue. The gubernatorial candidates are very different on climate issues. That's going to become an issue, and it's an Oregon issue. So I think there are going to be some big issues, and then there are all the issues we've been talking about earlier that are still with us. How we deal with homeless issues, public safety, and
not to mention things that are more esoteric, like trust and authenticity and all of these other bits we've been talking about, right?
Anybody else want to add something?
And the wild card, if Musk ends up with Twitter and Trump ends up back on the platform, I think that's going to actually become a bigger issue in November than we ever would have thought.
And this is a whole different conversation for another night.
Well, I hope you'll all come back as when we cover the election in November. But thank you so much to KGW political analyst Len Bergstein, Republican strategist Rebecca Tweed, and Jesse Beeson. Thank you so much for being here. And you guys are going to be on Straight Talk on Thursday to break down everything. So I will be taping that Thursday. Join us on Friday for Straight Talk.
And by the way, it is only 9:51. Results still coming in. 0 out of Clackamas County. We are looking at you tonight, by the way. So coming up over the next hour, continue to follow us on KGW.com. We'll update those results and make those projections as they come in. And then you can join Laural and I at 11 o'clock for a full breakdown of the results we have. We want to thank you for watching. Thanks to our panel here. Good night.
Good night.